The voicemail came through while I was sitting in my car outside Bella Nade on Harbor Street, engine off, watching a waiter move between tables through the front window. He was lighting the candle on table 7, my table, the one I'd reserved 3 weeks in advance, specifically requesting the corner spot near the window because the light was good there, and it felt celebratory without being showy. White linen tablecloth, 4 place settings, 4 wine glasses, a little folded card in the center that said "Happy Birthday" in gold script. The restaurant was filling up around that table like water rising around an island. Couples, families, groups of friends, all of them finding their seats, unfolding their napkins, reaching for their menus. My family was not coming. I'd known since 2 in the afternoon. But there is a difference, a very specific and excruciating difference between knowing something and having it confirmed in your sister's voice, flat and unbothered, like she was canceling a dentist appointment. Andrea, 30 years old, said 3 words. "Just skip it, Claire." And then she hung up. Not sorry. Not maybe next time. Just skip it the way you'd tell someone not to bother saving you a parking spot. I sat in that parking lot for longer than I should have. The September air coming through the cracked window smelled like salt and frying garlic, and the particular kind of evening that should have been good. The sky over the harbor was going pink at the edges. A couple walked past my car holding hands, laughing at something one of them had just said. I watched them push through the door of Bella Nade and disappear into the warm light inside, and I thought about the last 11 years of my life. All the Saturdays, all the spreadsheets, all the checks mailed on the 1st of the month, every month without exception, even when I was sick, even when I was exhausted, even when nobody had called me in 3 weeks except to ask why last month's deposit was 48 hours late. Welcome back to Hidden Family Secrets. I'm Claire. I'm 34 years old. I'm a licensed forensic accountant in a mid-sized coastal town in North Carolina. And until recently, I was also the sole trustee of a family estate that kept everyone I loved financially afloat for over 2 years. My grandmother built that estate. My stepfather dismantled it from the inside piece by piece over 18 months, using a contractor who didn't exist and invoices for repairs that were never made. My mother looked the other way. My sister pressed a thumbs up on the cruelest text message my mother had ever sent me. And I, the person who had been quietly holding all of it together, the person who filed the taxes and walked the properties and covered the bills nobody knew I was covering, sat alone in a parking lot on my birthday and decided that I was done being the engine of a machine that ran on my silence. This is the story of what happened when I finally read the fine print. Hargrove, North Carolina sits about 30 miles inland from the Outer Banks, tucked into a low valley where the land flattens out and the wind off the coast arrives diluted and tired. Population just over 11,000 on a good census year. 2 main roads, a stretch of waterfront boardwalk that floods when a storm comes through and is beautiful every other day, a Dollar General on Route 9, and 6 commercial properties on a stretch called Merchant Row that runs between the post office and the old First Baptist Church. My grandmother, Louise Tanner, purchased those properties one by one between 1987 and 2009, starting from nothing and ending with a legacy. I grew up in Hargrove. I walked past those buildings every single morning on the way to the bus stop. I knew them the way you know the features of a face you've looked at all your life. The florist on the end, always smelling of fresh stems and cold water, even from the sidewalk. The dental office beside it with the frosted glass door. The hardware store in the middle, where the owner, a man named Gerald, kept a folding chair outside and sat in it every afternoon reading the paper. The framing gallery, which was quiet and tasteful and had a rotating display in the window that changed every month. And on the corner, facing the harbor, a cafe called Sunrise Cup that had been open so long most people in Hargrove couldn't remember a time before it existed. That cafe had weathered 2 hurricanes, a recession, a pandemic, and 3 different ownership groups, and it was still there, still serving coffee at 6 in the morning to fishermen and nurses, and people who needed somewhere warm to sit. My grandmother started with the florist space. She'd worked 31 years at Caldwell Textile off Route 17, showing up every day in the same sensible shoes, saving every dollar she could, living carefully and deliberately in a way that embarrassed her children and made perfect sense to her. When the previous owner of the florist space retired and put the property up for sale, Louise bought it outright. She didn't open a business in it. She leased it back to a woman named Carol, who grew her own flowers in raised beds behind her house and had been looking for a retail space for years. Louise collected the rent check on the first of every month and put most of it directly back into a reserve account. She wasn't interested in flowers. She was interested in buildings. She understood in the bone-deep way that people who've worked for other people all their lives sometimes understand, that the person who owns the place where work happens is in a different category from the person who shows up to do the work. She bought the dental office space when the building's previous owner died and the heirs wanted to liquidate. She bought the hardware store unit when Gerald retired and his son moved to Charlotte and didn't want the property. She bought the framing gallery after a long negotiation with a difficult seller that took nearly 2 years. And she bought Sunrise Cups building last in 2009, in the middle of a financial crisis when prices had dropped and most people were too scared to buy anything. By the time I was in high school, she owned the whole row, 6 storefronts, all leased to long-term tenants, all generating steady income, managed with the same careful attention she'd applied to every corner of her financial life. She kept the books in a series of green spiral notebooks, 1 per year going back to 1987. Columns in pencil so she could correct mistakes. Income on the left, expenses on the right, reserve and net at the bottom of every page. She could tell you at any moment exactly how much money the properties had made and exactly where every dollar had gone. The summer I was 15, she sat me down at her kitchen table and taught me how to read those notebooks. Not just how to read them, how to build them. She had me recopy an entire year's worth of entries by hand, not because it was efficient, but because she wanted the logic of it to settle into my hands, not just my head. Income, overhead, reserve, net. The 4 columns that, she said, told you everything you needed to know about whether a thing was working or failing. You keep the reserve healthy, she told me, and the building keeps standing. You drain the reserve, and eventually everything falls. It's always eventually. People forget about eventually until it arrives. I took that lesson further than she probably expected. After community college, I got certified in forensic accounting, which is the kind of accounting you do when someone suspects the numbers have been arranged to hide something. I joined Harrelson Financial Services, a firm in Hargrove that handled audits and trust accounting and estate work for clients across 3 counties. I was good at it. The work suited something in my temperament, the patience for detail, the ability to look at a column of numbers and feel when something is slightly off, the way a musician feels when a note is almost but not quite in tune. 11 years later, I was still there. My name was on several significant audit reports. I'd testified twice in civil cases. My coworker Dana called me the human spreadsheet, which I took as a compliment. Outside of work, I was the trustee of my grandmother's estate. Louise had structured it as an irrevocable living trust, drafted by a lawyer in Kellerton about 15 years before she died, with the paperwork updated twice over the years as her circumstances changed. The trust held all 6 commercial properties on Merchant Row, plus the family home on Cedarbrook Lane, where my mother Patricia and her husband Dale now lived without paying rent. Total rental income from the storefronts averaged around $14,000 a month, depending on the season. The distribution split was: Patricia received $5,000. My Aunt Sandra received $3,500. I received $3,200. Louise had explained the reasoning to me once, quietly, while I sat with her in the chemo infusion suite during her 3rd treatment cycle. Both of us pretending the situation was more ordinary than it was. She gave Patricia the most because she worried about her most. She gave Sandra the middle amount because Sandra was steady but not financially sophisticated. She gave me the least because she trusted me most to be fine without a larger share. "You'll land on your own feet," she said, adjusting the oxygen tube that had become a fixture of her face by then. "You've always landed. Your mama won't, not without the cushion." I didn't argue. I was 29 and still operating under the belief that enough patience could fix the cracks in most relationships. That generosity was an investment that paid back eventually, even if eventually took a while. I believed that if I kept showing up, kept being reliable, kept being the person who answered the phone and handled the problem and mailed the check on time, eventually the people I loved would see it and reflect it back. I want to be honest about that belief because I think a lot of people reading this will recognize it. It's not naivety, exactly. It's more like a story you tell yourself about who you are and what family means. And you keep telling it even when the evidence starts stacking up against it, because the alternative story is one you're not ready to live in yet. Louise died 28 months ago. Ovarian cancer, fast and pitiless. She'd been sick for 8 months. For 7 of those 8 months, I drove her to appointments. I sat in the waiting room with her green ledger notebooks in my bag, updating entries while she was in the infusion chair. I coordinated with her doctors, tracked her medications, handled the estate paperwork that couldn't wait. I was there for the conversations that nobody wants to be there for, the ones where a doctor explains what the next few months are going to look like in language that is careful and kind and still devastating. My mother, Patricia, visited 4 times, once to bring flowers, which was genuinely kind, once to bring a printout from a real estate agent estimating what the 6 Merchant Row properties could sell for, which was not. My Aunt Sandra came once and cried the entire visit, which was understandable but not particularly useful. My mother's husband, Dale, did not visit at all. He sent a card with Patricia's name signed next to his. Before Louise went into hospice, she sat me down in her kitchen one last time. The green notebooks were on the table. She had a new binder, thick, color-tabbed, organized with a thoroughness that told me she'd spent time on it when she should have been resting. "This is everything," she told me. "Income, expenses, distributions, legal documents, contact information for the lawyer in Kellerton, insurance policies, property records." She walked me through every tab. Then she told me about the trust structure, who was named, what the terms were, what my authority as successor trustee included. She told me that the key to being a good trustee was the same as the key to being a good bookkeeper. Look at the numbers honestly and don't flinch from what they tell you. I cried on the drive home. I didn't cry in front of her because she hadn't cried in front of me, and I thought we were both holding ourselves together for the other one's sake. She died on a Tuesday morning in mid-November, with the light coming gray through the hospice window and her hands folded on the blanket like she was waiting for something she'd already made peace with. I was there. Patricia was there. Sandra was not. Dale was in the waiting room with a cup of coffee and his phone. I became trustee formally 2 weeks later, after the lawyer in Kellerton processed the paperwork. I mailed the first round of distribution checks that December. I set up the accounting system, organized the binders, walked the properties, introduced myself formally to all the tenants as the new trust administrator. I answered my mother's calls about the distribution schedule. I fielded questions from Sandra about whether her share could be increased. I handled the small maintenance issues that came up, a broken lock at the dental office, a water pressure problem at Sunrise Cup, a lighting issue in the hardware store's back room. I did all of this while working full-time at Harrelson, while paying my own rent and bills from my salary, while building a life that had nothing to do with the trust. I didn't draw from the trust for personal expenses. I didn't need to. But the distinction between the 2 parts of my life was important to me in a way I couldn't fully articulate at the time. The trust was Louise's thing, entrusted to me. My life was mine. I kept them separate with intention. Dale Mercer had married my mother 6 years before Louise died. He was the kind of man who entered rooms like he expected to be greeted, who laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them, who had strong opinions about things he hadn't thought carefully about. He'd run a home renovation company out of a rented garage space on Route 17, 2 vans, a changing roster of subcontractors he paid inconsistently, a company logo that looked like he'd designed it himself on a phone app late at night. The business had a good first year, a difficult second year, and then collapsed in the third year under the weight of unpaid supplier invoices and a leasing company that wanted its equipment back. He owed just over $40,000 when the company folded. That debt followed him into my mother's house, like an uninvited guest that nobody acknowledged, but everyone stepped around. My grandmother had not objected to the marriage. She'd watched it happen with the careful silence of a woman who had learned that some mistakes can't be prevented, only survived. Your mother's old enough to make her own choices, she told me, but keep your eyes open. I kept my eyes open. What I saw was a man who treated money like a problem that would solve itself if you waited long enough and complained loudly enough in the meantime. What I didn't see, not for a long time, was what he was doing with the trust's maintenance reserve, but I'm getting to that. 3.5 years ago, while Louise was in her 4th round of chemotherapy, Patricia called me. Not to ask how Louise was feeling, not to check whether I needed anything, not even to ask about Thanksgiving, which was 2 weeks away. She called to ask whether I'd considered selling the Merchant Row properties. Dale's business situation, she said, as though giving it a formal title made it more manageable. We're in a difficult position, Claire. I know the trust has assets. I know you have authority over those assets. I need you to think about what family means here. I told her what the trust terms said. A sale of trust assets was permissible only if I, as trustee, determined it served the trust's long-term interests. Selling 6 income-producing commercial properties to retire one man's personal business debt did not, under any reasonable interpretation, serve the trust's long-term interests. The properties generated $14,000 a month. They were in excellent condition. They were fully tenanted. Selling them would be replacing a reliable revenue stream with a one-time payment that would be consumed by Dale's creditors and leave the beneficiaries with nothing. Patricia went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "So you're choosing the buildings over your own mother?" I tried to explain the difference between a fiduciary obligation and a personal choice. She hung up before I finished the sentence. After that call, every conversation we had orbited money. She called to ask about the distribution schedule. She called to ask whether the December check was late because of something I'd done. She called to ask whether I could adjust the percentages to give her a larger share, whether the trust terms allowed for increases in distributions in hardship situations, whether there was any mechanism by which she could access the reserve fund for personal expenses. The answer to each of these questions was no, for reasons I explained each time with patience that slowly became more effortful to maintain. She never called to ask how I was doing. She never called to talk about Louise or to share a memory or to just hear another person's voice on the other end of the line. She called to hear a number. Every single time, she called to hear a number. My sister Andrea was 4 years younger than me. 30 to my 34. She worked part-time at the front desk of a physical therapy clinic, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and alternating Fridays. The trust distribution covered her rent and most of her groceries. The student loan payment, $260 a month on a degree she'd finished and then not really used, had been quietly set to auto-pay from my personal checking account for nearly 2 years. She hadn't asked me to set that up. She didn't know I had. When she'd mentioned over lunch one afternoon that the loan payment was making her months really tight, she hadn't been asking for help. She'd just been talking. I'd gone home that evening and set up the autopay, the way I did most things for the people I loved, quietly, without announcement, without expectation of acknowledgement. I thought that was how you showed up for someone. I thought it was enough. Andrea's problem with me was different from Patricia's. Patricia resented me for having authority she couldn't access or override. Andrea's feeling was more complicated and, in some ways, harder to navigate. When Louise named me sole trustee and passed over Andrea entirely, Andrea heard something in that decision that had nothing to do with practical qualifications. She heard a judgment about worth, a ranking of the grandchildren in terms of who Louise valued more, who she trusted more, who she thought was more capable of handling something important. I tried to explain more than once that Louise had chosen me because I had the specific professional background the role required, because forensic accounting and trust administration overlapped enough that the learning curve for me was manageable, and for someone without that background, it would have been steep. Andrea listened to this explanation and said, "That's the same thing, Claire. She chose you because she trusted you more." And then she pulled her distance around her like a coat. She wasn't cruel about it. She didn't fight with me or say cutting things to my face. She just became gradually less present. Texts answered hours later when they were answered at all. Plans made and then quietly unmade without an alternative offered. Phone calls going to voicemail and returned with a short text saying, "Sorry, busy." Everything punctuated with the thumbs up emoji, that small yellow hand that means I acknowledge your existence without committing to anything further. Last spring, for Andrea's 30th birthday, I spent 3 weeks tracking down the specific camera she'd been researching and saving for. A mirrorless model she'd bookmarked on her laptop during a family dinner months earlier, one she'd mentioned offhand twice and I'd filed away. I ordered it, wrapped it carefully, drove 40 minutes to her apartment. She wasn't home. I left it at the door with a card that I'd written 3 drafts of because I wanted to get the tone right, warm without being heavy, celebratory without being pressuring. She texted me 4 days later. "Thanks, Claire." 2 words. That same weekend, she posted a long reel from a beach trip with her college friends. Everyone laughing, golden hour light, a birthday cake with 30 candles, champagne glasses raised toward the camera. It was a good reel. I watched it twice and then put my phone down and went for a walk. Andrea didn't dislike me. I want to be clear about that. She wasn't working against me. She just didn't think about me. Not really. Not in the way that adds up to presence over time. I existed in her life the way a piece of furniture exists in a room you've stopped noticing. Present, functional, unremarkable, easy to walk past. And that was a particular kind of lonely that was different from feeling actively disliked. Active dislike at least implies you matter enough to push against. Furniture doesn't. 3 weeks before my birthday, I sent a group text. Patricia, Andrea, Dale. I typed it 3 times before I sent it, trying to find the version that was warm without being desperate, casual without being dismissive of something I actually cared about. What I landed on was, "Hey everyone, my birthday is the 17th. I made a reservation at Bella Notte for 4 people, 7 p.m. Would love to have dinner together. Nothing fancy, just dinner." Bella Notte was a mid-range Italian place on Harbor Street, about a 10-minute walk from the waterfront. Red checkered tablecloths, a chalkboard menu that changed with the season, good pasta, excellent bread, and a house wine that was better than it had any right to be at the price. I'd chosen it carefully. Not so nice that the setting felt like a setup for a significant occasion that might not materialize. Not so casual that it felt like I didn't care. Low stakes, easy to say yes to. Patricia replied that same afternoon, "We'll see." 2 words, which from my mother carried the specific weight of someone who had not yet decided whether to be inconvenienced. Andrea read the message and left it on read. Not a reply, not even a thumbs up. Just the small read indicator that told me she'd seen it and chosen for the moment to say nothing. Dale, nothing. A week before my birthday, I sent a follow-up. Just casual, just checking in. Bella Notte, Thursday the 17th, 7 p.m. Still have the reservation if you can make it. Patricia replied, "We'll try, Claire." Andrea replied with a thumbs up emoji. Dale, still nothing. I told myself that was fine. I told myself people were busy, that the thumbs up meant something, that "we'll try" was more yes than no. I told myself a lot of things that week that I didn't really believe. The morning of September 17th, I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that has a specific texture when you're waiting for it to be broken. I made coffee. I got dressed. I drove to Harrelson and sat at my desk and opened my files for the day. My coworker Dana had left a birthday message on a sticky note on my monitor in large capital letters. Happy Birthday Queen. With a small paper crown, she'd folded herself out of a piece of printer paper and balanced on top of my stapler. I put the crown on my desk lamp and left it there all day. It made me feel something I didn't want to examine too closely. I worked through the morning. Noon came and went. Nothing from my family. I checked my phone 3 times between 1 and 2:30 and then put it face down on my desk and told myself I was not going to check it again until 5. I made it to 4:15. No calls, no voicemails, one notification from a subscription service I'd forgotten I had, offering me 15% off my next order. At 5, I closed my laptop and drove to Harbor Street. I parked across from the restaurant and sat there with the engine off. Through the front window, I could see the waiter finishing with table 7. White cloth, 4 settings, 4 glasses, the little birthday card in the center, and a single candle in a glass holder, freshly lit. The flame moved slightly in the air from the kitchen and steadied. I watched it for a while. At 7:15, I did the thing I had promised myself I wasn't going to do. I opened the group chat and typed, "I know you're all busy. I just wanted to say it would have meant a lot to hear from you today. Happy birthday to me, I guess." I put the phone on the passenger seat and looked at the restaurant. A family of 4 was being seated near the front. 2 women at the bar were laughing at something on one of their phones. The couple who'd walked past me earlier were at a table near the window, sharing a bottle of something that caught the candlelight. Bella Notte was full and warm, and somewhere inside it, table 7 was waiting. 20 minutes. No response. Then the typing indicator appeared in the group chat. Patricia. I watched it pulse. Start, stop, start again, like she was drafting and reconsidering, drafting and reconsidering. The message arrived at 7:42. We didn't forget, Claire. We just decided it wasn't worth the drive. You've made everything about the estate for the past 2 years, and we're honestly exhausted by it. We need some distance. Don't reach out for a while. I read it once, then I read it again. Then a second notification arrived. Not a reply, a reaction notification. Andrea reacted to a message. My sister. My 30-year-old sister, whose rent was covered by a trust I managed, whose student loan had been quietly paid from my personal account for 23 months, for whom I'd tracked down a specific camera and left it on a doorstep with a carefully written card. She read what our mother had written and she pressed the thumbs up. The candle on table 7 burned down to nothing while I sat in that parking lot. I don't want to dramatize what happened next, because what happened next was actually very quiet. There was no crying. There was no anger, not in the way anger announces itself. There was a long, flat stillness. And then somewhere behind my sternum, something that had been slightly ajar for 2 years, closed and locked. Quietly. The way a door closes when no one is watching. The way a decision forms before you know you've made it. I sat in the parking lot until the waiter inside cleared table 7. He folded the napkins, set the menus back in their holder, snuffed the candle. The table became just another table in a full restaurant, no different from any other. I watched him move on to the next thing, because the restaurant had other things to move on to, and so did I. I went inside. The hostess looked at me with an expression I recognized, the particular gentleness that service workers extend to people who are visibly carrying something they haven't asked for help with. She seated me at a small corner two-top without being asked, handed me a menu, and didn't ask how many were in my party. I ordered the rigatoni bolognese. I ordered a glass of the house Pinot. I ordered the bread, which came warm and excellent, the kind of bread that makes you briefly forget that anything is wrong. I ate slowly. I didn't look at my phone. I tipped 40% and told the waiter on my way out that the food had been genuinely wonderful, because it had been, and because I had made a decision in that parking lot not to let the evening take away the parts of itself that were actually good. I drove home. I locked my door. I made tea, and then I went to the bookshelf, pulled down the estate binder, and sat down at my kitchen table to read it. Not for the numbers. I knew the numbers by heart. For the language. for the provisions I'd read quickly years ago and filed away under things I would probably never need. I read the trust document the way I read a client's file on the first day of a new audit, carefully, without assumptions, starting from the beginning. Section 1, the preamble. Section 2, the property holdings. Section 3, the distribution structure. Section 4, the trustee appointment and succession. Section 5, trustee authority and discretion. Section 5.8b. I stopped. The trustee may, at her sole discretion, temporarily suspend or adjust discretionary distributions to any beneficiary whose conduct the trustee reasonably determines to be materially adverse to the purposes of the trust or to the trustee's capacity to fulfill her fiduciary duties. I read it again. Then I set the binder down and opened my phone and looked at Patricia's message. Don't reach out for a while. A beneficiary in writing, on a time-stamped platform, directing the trustee to cease contact. In any ordinary family context, that was a fight that would blow over by the following week. Under the governing terms of a trust, with the parties in the roles they occupied, it was documentation. It was a beneficiary on record, creating a paper trail that affected the fiduciary relationship. I was a forensic accountant. I'd testified in civil proceedings about documentation. I understood better than most people what it meant when something was written down and time-stamped and saved on a server somewhere. I kept reading. Section 7.4. The trustee is authorized to commission an independent audit of trust expenditures if she identifies irregularities or has reasonable grounds to suspect misuse of trust funds. Section 9.2, formal beneficiary notification requirements for trustee actions, including distribution suspensions, certified mail, return receipt, specific statutory language regarding the nature of the action and its legal basis. These weren't buried clauses. They were printed in standard type on pages I'd handled dozens of times. I just never needed them before. Or rather, I'd never let myself need them before, because needing them meant acting on them, and acting on them meant a confrontation I'd been avoiding for 2 years. I set the binder down and looked at my phone again. Not at Patricia's message. Past it, further back in the thread, back to February, Dale's maintenance invoices, the ones I'd flagged and never followed up on. The ones with round numbers and vague descriptions, and a vendor I couldn't find in any contractor registry. The question marks I'd highlighted in yellow and filed under things to handle after tax season. Tax season had ended in April. It was now mid-September. 5 months of question marks. I was going to answer them now. The next morning, I got to Harrelson before anyone else, unlocked the office myself, made coffee, and pulled up the estate's digital records. I printed every maintenance invoice from the past 14 months. 17 invoices, all submitted by Dale Mercer, all paid from the estate's maintenance reserve account. I spread them across my desk and looked at them the way Louise had taught me to look at numbers. Look for the pattern. Not just the individual entries, the pattern. What does the whole picture tell you? Roof replacement unit 2, $4,800. Plumbing overhaul unit 5, $3,200. Electrical panel upgrade unit 4, $5,900. HVAC servicing, family home on Cedarbrook Lane, $2,700. Foundation inspection units 1 and 3, combined, $6,100. Water heater replacement, florist unit, $3,000. Exterior paint and sealant, hardware store unit, $2,600. Every amount was a round number, not rounded to the nearest hundred, which might be a vendor's standard invoicing practice. Exactly round, to the dollar, every single one. In my professional experience, real contractor invoices almost never came out to perfectly round numbers. Materials plus labor plus overhead plus markup almost always produced something with digits after the zero. The roundness alone wasn't proof of anything, but it was a pattern. And patterns were where you started. The vendor was listed identically on every invoice. Tidewater Maintenance Solutions. Phone number, mailing address, no website URL, no state contractor license number. I'd asked Dale about this back in February during a phone call that had started about something else. Who's Tidewater? I told him I couldn't find them registered with the county or the state contractor board. Dale had laughed, that warm, easy laugh he used when he wanted a conversation to end. Local guy, he said. Kenny something. Does great work. Not the most formal operation. I told him I'd need proper documentation. He said he'd handle it. I'd let it go because February was the beginning of audit season and I had 36 active client files, and I told myself I'd come back to it. I hadn't come back to it. I stacked the invoices in a folder, put them in my bag, and drove to Merchant Row on my lunch break that day. Unit 2 was the bookshop. Warren Gill had been renting that space for 9 years. A tall, quiet man who moved through his store like he was afraid of startling the books. He knew every title on every shelf. He'd once helped me find a book I could only describe as something about a woman in a red coat in what might have been Russia, and he'd found it in under 3 minutes. I parked in front, got out, looked at the roofline. The invoice, dated 14 months ago, claimed a full roof replacement. New membrane, flashing, sealed seams. The works, $4,800 in materials and labor. I walked around the side of the building to the drain pipe. There was a water stain on the brick, running from a point about halfway up the wall to the foundation, fresh enough that the center of it was still darker than the edges. I went inside. Warren was at the register organizing a new shipment. "Morning, Claire." He looked up. "Anything I can help with?" "Actually, yes. Did anyone come and do roof work on this building in the last year or so? A company called Tidewater? Or a contractor named Kenny?" Warren looked at me for a moment. "Nobody's been on this roof since I moved in. I've got a bucket in the storage room back there that I move around when it rains hard depending on where it's coming in. I've mentioned it to Dale a few times. He keeps saying he'll look into it." I thanked him, took a few photos of the water stain with my phone, and moved to the next unit. I spent 3 lunch breaks that week walking the entire row. I asked every tenant the same questions. Had any contractors come to do work recently, specifically for the items listed on the invoices I was holding? Plumbing at the dental office? No. Electrical panel at the framing gallery? No. HVAC work at the hardware store? No. Nobody at Sunrise Cup could recall anyone doing anything to the building systems in the past 18 months. The florist, Carol, told me she'd been asking about the water heater for almost a year because it took forever to get hot water in the back room. Nobody had come. By the time I finished the row, I had 17 invoices totaling $31,000 for work that had definitively never been performed on properties I was legally responsible for. The phone number for Tidewater Maintenance Solutions was out of service, a recording telling me the number had been disconnected. The mailing address on the invoices was a P.O. box number that, when I called the Hargrove post office, had never been assigned to any registered account. I sat in my car on Merchant Row after the last property visit and looked at the manila folder on the passenger seat. I thought about Dale submitting these invoices month after month, knowing that I was managing a large volume of estate and client work, knowing that I trusted the system I'd set up, knowing that I had flagged but not followed up in February. I thought about him sitting in Louise's house, in the home her labor had paid for, collecting rent checks from an estate he was quietly and methodically draining. Then I called Margaret Cho. Margaret ran an estate and trust law practice out of a Victorian row house in Kellerton, 20 minutes north of Hargrove. I'd found her through the State Bar's referral directory specifically for estate and trust matters. I'd spoken to her once before, briefly, when I first became trustee, just to confirm I understood the terms correctly. She'd been precise and efficient and had told me to call if anything complicated came up. I called on a Tuesday morning. I was in her office by Thursday afternoon. Her office was the kind of space that suggested its occupant had been working seriously for a long time. floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, organized but not pristine, the kind of organization that had evolved organically around actual use. A desk with 2 neat stacks of active files and a cleared central workspace. A window that looked over a small garden. A coffee mug that said, "In trust we trust," which I suspected was a gift. She read through everything I'd brought. The trust document, the invoices, the tenant statements I'd written up from my notes, the photos, the screenshots of Patricia's text, moving through it with the focused quiet of someone who reads difficult documents for a living. When she set it down, she looked at me over her reading glasses for a moment before speaking. Section 5.8b gives you broad discretionary authority. The invoices establish clear financial misconduct. That's your primary ground for a temporary suspension of distributions pending independent review. She paused, tapping the screenshot printout. The text message from your mother creates a secondary basis. A beneficiary directing the trustee in writing to cease contact is documented conduct that materially affects your capacity to fulfill your fiduciary duties. Together, these 2 things make your case straightforward. I said, "I'm not trying to punish anyone. I want to stop something that should have been caught earlier, and I want to fix the structure so it can't happen again." Margaret nodded. "That's the right frame. But I want you to be clear on something." She leaned forward slightly. "If you were aware of those invoices and you continued authorizing distribution payments without acting on the irregularities, you would be personally liable for losses to the trust. This isn't a situation where you have the option to look the other way for the sake of family peace. You have a legal obligation to act. The question is only how you act." I sat with that for a long moment. 3 years of treating the estate like a favor I was choosing to extend. Like generosity I was performing out of love. I hadn't understood, or hadn't let myself understand, that the trust wasn't mine to be generous with. It was Louise's, and I was its guardian, and guardians don't get to choose when they feel like guarding. Margaret walked me through the process, a written summary of the hostile conduct with supporting documentation, the full audit evidence, organized and indexed, 3 formal notification letters, 1 to each beneficiary, sent by certified mail with return receipt requested. Each letter would cite the specific trust sections, describe the basis for the action in detail, and outline the process for resolution and reinstatement of distributions. On the drive home, I passed the Italian restaurant on Oak Street, where I knew Andrea was planning her birthday dinner the following weekend. I could see the long party table through the window, already set up with a white cloth and candle holders, space for 8 or 10 people. I slowed down without planning to, and sat there at the curb with the engine idling for a minute, looking at that table. The manila folder was on the passenger seat, $31,000 in phantom repairs. The thought came, and I didn't push it away. I could walk into that party. I could sit down at that long table, order a drink, smile at everyone, and then spread those invoices across the tablecloth between the bread basket and the wine glasses, and watch Dale Mercer try to explain why a contractor who didn't exist had been paid for work that was never done in front of everyone my sister cared about. I drove past. I kept driving. But the thought came back to me 3 more times that evening, each time arriving as something closer to a plan than an impulse. I found a gray blazer at the thrift store on Route 11 2 days later. $9. Structured, professional, the kind of thing you'd wear to a meeting where you needed to be taken seriously. I hung it in the back seat of my car and told myself I was keeping my options open. For 3 days, I drove to and from work with that blazer hanging behind me and the manila folder on the passenger seat. And every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I ran through the scene again. The invoices on the tablecloth, Dale's face, the silence that would fall over the table. It felt satisfying in my imagination, clean and justified, and exactly the kind of reversal that felt, in the private narrative I was running in my head, like it would restore something. But a question kept surfacing that I couldn't file away under any of my mental columns. If I walked into Andrea's birthday party with that folder, who exactly was I doing it for? For the trust? For the tenants who'd been living in buildings with unaddressed maintenance problems while Dale pocketed the money meant to fix them? For Louise, who had spent 40 years building something she trusted me to protect? Or was I doing it for myself? For the version of me that had sat in a parking lot alone on her birthday and wanted someone to feel as small as she had felt? Those are different things. The first one is a fiduciary duty. The second one is a wound that wants company. I knew which one Margaret would tell me to act from. I knew which one Louise would have recognized. The blazer stayed in the car. The quarterly trust inspection was scheduled for the following Wednesday. As trustee, I was required to physically inspect the family home on Cedar Brook Lane every quarter, same as the commercial properties, to confirm the condition of the asset and note any maintenance requirements. Patricia and Dale were out when I arrived. Their car wasn't in the driveway, and the house had that specific quiet that an empty building has. Not just still, but unoccupied. I used my trustee key, walked through the main floor, checked the windows and doors, the water heater, the smoke detectors. Then I went to the basement. The furnace needed a filter change. I noted it on my clipboard. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of holiday decoration boxes and a folding table that had been there since I was a teenager, there was a cardboard box I hadn't seen before. It was sealed with tape that had dried and was starting to peel at the corners. On the side, in my grandmother's handwriting, in the blue pen she always used, Sabrina. Personal. She'd used my middle name, the one she'd always called me when we were alone together. Not Claire. Sabrina. I knelt down and opened it. Inside, a stack of her green ledger notebooks from the early years of the trust, before she handed it to me. Some family photographs from the 90s, the ones I didn't know copies of existed. A recipe card for her lemon pound cake, handwritten on an index card with a small grease stain in the corner that told me she'd made it while the card was on the counter. And an envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with my full name written on the front in her careful cursive, Claire Sabrina Holloway, and beneath that, in smaller letters, 30th birthday. She'd written it before she died. She'd never mailed it. I'd turned 14 months after the funeral, and this card had been sitting in a box in a corner of a basement while I spent that birthday eating cake at my desk and trying not to feel the absence. I opened the envelope. It was a drugstore card with a sunflower on the front. Simple, ordinary, the kind of card she'd always preferred over elaborate ones. Her handwriting covered the inside in blue pen, the same blue pen she'd used on the box. Sabrina. 30 years old, and you've already done what most people won't in a lifetime. You showed up. Every Saturday, every ledger, every hard conversation nobody else would have. I know it's thankless. I know they don't see it, but I see it. The ones who show up are the ones who matter. Don't let anyone who stayed away tell you what home means. I love you. June. I sat on the basement floor and held the card in both hands for a long time. Above me, the house creaked in the afternoon wind. The house that the trust owned. The house my mother lived in, rent-free. I could hear the particular sound the floorboards made when the temperature shifted, a sound I'd known since childhood. Since the years when this house had still been Louise's house, and coming here had meant Saturday mornings at the kitchen table with the green ledger. I folded the card, put it in my jacket pocket, and climbed the stairs. The blazer stayed in the car. I was not going to Andrea's birthday party. I called Margaret from the driveway before I even backed out. I want to proceed with the formal action, I said. Full suspension of discretionary distributions pending fiduciary review per Section 5.8b. Margaret said, I'll prepare the documentation. She walked me through what she needed from me and when, and we set a timeline. I thanked her and drove home. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a scanner, and the manila folder, and I built the evidence packet the same way I'd build an audit file for a client going into litigation. Tabbed, indexed, with a cover page summarizing key findings in the format an attorney or a judge would find easy to navigate. 17 scanned invoices, annotated with the property addresses and the date ranges in question. 6 photographs of the relevant properties, dated with location data from my phone, 4 written tenant statements signed, 1 printout of the group text exchange with a highlighted section around Patricia's message and the notification that Andrea had reacted to it, 1 printout of the voicemail Dale had left, transcribed. At the bottom of the stack, I placed the phone records showing the Tidewater number resolving to a disconnected prepaid cell, and the written confirmation from the post office that the P.O. box on the invoices had never been registered. I organized everything and sat back and looked at it. Then I opened my bank account and canceled the auto pay for Andrea's student loan, $260 a month from my personal checking account that she had never known about and never asked for. I canceled it without drama or announcement, the way I'd set it up quietly, because I was not going to continue doing invisible favors for someone who had just given a thumbs up to a message telling me to go away. Margaret had the letters drafted by the following Monday. 3 envelopes from her firm's letterhead: Patricia Mercer, Sandra Tanner, Claire Holloway. Each letter stated in the careful, precise language of legal correspondence that as successor trustee of the Louise Tanner family estate, I was exercising my authority under Sections 5.8b and 7.4 to temporarily suspend discretionary distributions to all beneficiaries, effective immediately, pending an independent fiduciary review of trust expenditures and beneficiary conduct. The grounds were stated clearly: documented hostile conduct by a beneficiary toward the trustee, specifically a written directive to cease contact from a named beneficiary, submitted via digital communication on a time-stamped platform, and evidence of fraudulent maintenance expenditures totaling approximately $31,000 submitted by a non-beneficiary household member with apparent access to trust accounts, for work that physical inspection and tenant testimony confirm was never performed. Her paralegal sent all 3 letters by certified mail on Tuesday morning. Return receipt requested. I tracked them from my desk at Harrelson, refreshing the USPS tracking page in a tab next to a spreadsheet I was building for a client's quarterly return. 3 small packages making their way south and west from Kellerton toward Hargrove. I checked the tracking more often than was necessary. There was something clarifying about watching them move. They were on their way. The question marks were about to be answered, just not for me. They arrived Thursday morning, all 3 signed for by Dale Mercer. 1 trip to the mailbox, 1 signature, 3 envelopes from a law firm in Kellerton with the words Estate Administration printed neatly on the return label. I imagined him standing at the end of the Cedarbrook driveway, flipping through the envelopes, reading the return address on the first one, going still, opening it, reading the words suspension of discretionary distributions, an independent fiduciary review, and fraudulent maintenance expenditures. I imagined his face doing the particular kind of calculation that faces do when a person is deciding very quickly whether they can talk their way out of something. At 11:15, a text from Andrea. "Hey, are you seriously doing something with the estate right now? Mom is upset." I didn't respond. At 12:40, she called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message: "Claire, just call Mom back. It's probably a misunderstanding." I listened to the message once, made a note, saved it. $31,000 in fabricated invoices, and Andrea thought it was the kind of misunderstanding that a phone call could smooth over before dinner. Patricia called 4 times between 1 and 5. I didn't pick up. At 6:30, Dale left a voicemail, voice controlled and deliberate, the careful tone of someone who was deciding what to sound like. "You're making a serious mistake, Claire. Call me." Then at 8:15, another voicemail, different tone entirely. "Sabrina, I can explain the invoices. It's not what you think it is. Call me back." I noted the shift from first name to middle name. The one my grandmother used for me, probably pulled from seeing it on the envelope, probably meant to signal familiarity, warmth, the suggestion of a family relationship that superseded formal proceedings. I added both messages to the file. Friday morning, I turned my phone over and went to work. Linda at the front desk asked if I'd had a nice birthday. I told her the restaurant had been excellent. I filed a quarterly extension for a construction company, processed payroll for a veterinary clinic, reviewed the preliminary findings on a new audit assignment. At lunch, I checked my email. Margaret had written, "Received a call from your mother this morning. She wanted to understand what was happening." I provided a neutral summary, procedure only, fiduciary review initiated, distribution suspended pending audit, estimated duration 2 to 4 weeks. She asked about the fraud allegation. I confirmed that evidence of irregular maintenance expenditures had been identified. She did not appear to have prior knowledge of the specifics. Patricia didn't know about the fake invoices. She knew the money had stopped. She knew there was a law firm involved, but she didn't know that the man sleeping next to her had been filing fraudulent repair claims and pocketing the money for a year and a half. That conversation was going to happen on Cedar Brook Lane, and I was not going to be the one having it. Friday evening, just before 7, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. Dale, alone. He was wearing a tucked-in polo shirt and dark slacks, as though he'd dressed for a meeting he hadn't been invited to. His jaw was set. His hands were at his sides, but not relaxed, too still to be relaxed. I opened the door but kept the chain on. 4 inches of space between us, and through that gap his aftershave arrived before anything else. He said my name. I said his. "Fix this," he said. "Your mother is upstairs right now having a panic attack because some lawyer she's never heard of called and told her the money's been suspended. Whatever you think you're doing, fix it." "The money's not suspended, Dale. It's in a temporary hold pending a review. The letter explains the process." Process. He said the word the way someone says a word they've never used before and aren't sure about. This isn't a legal situation, Claire. This is family. You can't run your family like a business. You submitted $31,000 in invoices for repairs that never happened. I said it the way I said numbers at work, flat and accurate, with no weight added and none removed. That's not a family matter. That's fraud. The space behind his eyes went blank. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Those were legitimate expenses. I hired Kenny. He's just not the most formal operation. The phone number on every invoice is a disconnected prepaid cell. The mailing address is a P.O. box that doesn't exist in the Hargrove Postal Registry. Warren at the bookshop told me nobody has touched that roof in 9 years. The dental office hasn't had a plumber. He took a half step back. His face did the calculation again, and this time the math wasn't working out the way he needed it to. Darlene at the framing gallery said the same thing. Every tenant on Merchant Row said the same thing. Nobody came, not once, not for any of the 17 invoices. He opened his mouth. "Good night, Dale." I closed the door. Deadbolt. Chain. I stood in the hallway and listened. He didn't knock again. He stood on the porch for a long enough time that I could hear his breathing through the door, that particular held-in quality of a man deciding whether he still has a move. Then his footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate. His truck door, the engine turning over. And then the sound of Cedar Brook pulling him back toward a house he didn't own and a wife who was about to find out everything. Saturday morning, I woke up to a text from Andrea, sent after midnight. "Mom and Ray are screaming at each other." "What did you do?" She'd used his name. She usually called him Dale. The slip told me something about how the night had gone. I sat on the edge of my bed and typed back the first message I'd sent to anyone in my family in 10 days. I didn't do anything, Megan. I found what Ray did. I could picture Cedar Brook at midnight. Patricia in the kitchen with the letter in one hand, voice climbing the way it did when she was frightened. Dale backed against the counter, trying to stay warm, trying the explanations that had always worked before and finding they weren't working anymore. The round numbers, the P.O. box, the disconnected phone, the roof that still leaked, the water heater that had never been replaced, the money that had gone somewhere. $48,000 as it turned out, not 31. Margaret had engaged an independent forensic accountant named Joyce Albright through her professional network to conduct the trust audit. Joyce was methodical and deliberate in the way that people are methodical and deliberate when their conclusions have occasionally ended up in court proceedings. She went through 22 months of maintenance records, cross-referencing invoice claims against physical property inspections, contractor registration databases, bank deposit records, and tenant testimony. Her report arrived in my inbox on a Thursday morning, and I read it with my office door closed. The findings were worse than I'd estimated. Dale had submitted not 17 but 26 fraudulent invoices across 22 months. The additional 9 predated my tenure as trustee. They went back to a period 6 months before Louise died, when she was still technically the trustee, but was too ill and too heavily medicated to actively review expenditures. During those final months of her illness, Dale had volunteered to handle the maintenance paperwork. He'd positioned it as helping, as taking something off her plate while she focused on treatment. Louise, trusting her daughter's husband, had signed whatever he put in front of her. She'd been in a chemo chair when she signed them. She'd been in hospice by the time the last ones were processed. He had started stealing from the estate while my grandmother was dying. Those earlier invoices had been filed in a folder at the Cedarbrook house, in a filing cabinet in the spare room, separate from the binder Louise had organized for me. They predated my binder. I had never seen them until Joyce pulled the full ledger from the trust's bank records and cross-referenced everything. Total, $48,400, 26 invoices, 22 months. A contractor who had never existed. Work that had never been done, money extracted from an estate that a dying woman had spent 40 years building. Joyce's report stated, in the dry formal language of forensic accounting, the expenditures described in the above invoices are unsupported by physical evidence, independent contractor verification, or legitimate business documentation. The pattern is consistent with systematic misappropriation of trust funds by a party with access to the trust's administrative processes. Margaret called me that afternoon. She walked me through my options. Criminal referral to the county district attorney's office. Civil suit for recovery of the full $48,000. Removal of Patricia as a beneficiary on grounds of failure to prevent household fraud. Or restructuring of trust administration with enforceable safeguards, repayment schedule, and formal activation of the hostile conduct provision. I chose restructuring. No police referral, not yet. No removal. I wanted the money recovered and I wanted the system rebuilt so that what had happened could not happen again. I wanted an independent property management company handling all maintenance so that no family member or household member could ever submit another invoice for any reason. I wanted annual audits. I wanted written request protocols. I wanted the hostile conduct clause formally activated and clearly defined. I wanted my family to understand, in the specific way that signed legal documents communicate understanding, that the person they had been treating as invisible was the reason the lights were still on. Margaret drafted the restructured administration terms. New letters, formal, clear, legally precise. Distributions would resume once each beneficiary had signed an acknowledgement accepting 4 conditions. First, all property maintenance for the 6 Merchant Row storefronts and the Cedarbrook family home would be handled exclusively by Coastal Property Services, an independent licensed management company at market rates. No maintenance requests from beneficiaries or household members would be accepted or processed. Second, all financial requests relating to the trust must be submitted in writing to the trustee. No phone calls, no informal arrangements, no verbal agreements. Third, an annual independent audit of trust expenditures conducted by an outside firm not affiliated with any party, paid from trust operating funds. Fourth, Section 5.8b was now formally activated. Any documented threats, written harassment, deliberate interference with trust operations, or conduct materially adverse to the trustee's capacity to fulfill her duties by any beneficiary or household member would trigger an automatic 90-day suspension of that beneficiary's distributions. These were not punitive terms. Every single condition existed because its absence had already caused demonstrable harm. Every condition could have been avoided if anyone in my family had treated the trustee like a person rather than a mechanism. I wrote that in my notes to myself the night I reviewed the draft, not because it was relevant to the legal document, but because I needed to say it somewhere. The letters arrived on a Wednesday. Patricia called Thursday evening. Her voice was vibrating between anger and something else, something that was trying to be anger but wasn't entirely. You want me to sign a document that says I have to be polite to my own daughter. That's what this is. The trust doesn't have a category for polite, I told her. It has terms and beneficiaries and a trustee. You directed the trustee to cease contact in writing. I'm operating according to your instruction. Silence. Then, I want to come over. All of us. This weekend. You're going to sit at a table with us and explain yourself like you're part of this family. You're welcome here, I said. The terms won't change. She hung up. I set the phone down and looked at the light through the kitchen window. It was a late September evening and the sky was the particular clear dark blue it gets on the coast when the humidity finally breaks. I made sure the porch light was on. Then I set the coffee maker for the next morning because Sunday was going to be long. They arrived early afternoon. I heard the cars from my kitchen. 3 of them. Patricia's sedan, Dale's truck, and then the lighter click of a smaller door. The one I recognized after 2 years of paying the loan on the vehicle behind it. Andrea coming last, which tracked, footsteps on the exterior stairs. Dale first, heavy and fast, the step of a man trying to arrive at something before he's ready. Patricia behind him. Andrea at the back, slower, uncertain. The knock was Dale's, hard enough to rattle the frame. I crossed the room and opened the door all the way. No chain. Patricia came through first without waiting to be invited, purse swinging, eyes moving across the apartment, the way someone surveys a room they're mentally evaluating. Dale followed, filling the hallway with aftershave and barely contained agitation, hands moving without settling anywhere, back and forth from his pockets to his sides. Andrea came in last and stood near the kitchen doorway, arms folded across herself, eyes on the floor. All 3 of them ended up in the kitchen, drawn to the table where the estate binder sat open next to the color-coded evidence folders and the printed spreadsheets I'd been reviewing that morning. 2 years of Saturday mornings were laid out on that table. 2 years of property walks and tenant calls and quarterly filings and maintenance coordination and 12 monthly distributions, mailed on time every single month, even when I had a cold, even when I was working overtime, even when nobody had called me in a month to say anything except ask about the deposit. Patricia stood at the head of the table. "Sit down," she said. "This is my home, Mom. I'll stand." Dale was pacing, the strip between the stove and the window, back and forth, jaw working. I watched him move and thought about all the times I'd given him the benefit of the doubt in this kitchen. Not in this kitchen. He'd never been in this kitchen. None of them had ever been in this apartment. The thought arrived and settled without emphasis. Patricia started with what she'd come in with. "You've suspended our income over a birthday text, over one text message, Claire. And you've brought a lawyer into a family matter and sent official letters to my home like we're strangers." "This isn't about the text message," I said. The independent audit found $48,000 in fraudulent invoices, submitted over 22 months. All by Dale. All paid from the estate's maintenance reserve. All for work that was never performed. Patricia's eyes moved to Dale. 48,000. She said the number like she was testing whether it was real. "You told me those were real repairs," she said. "Those were real contractors." Dale stopped pacing. I hired Kenny. He runs a small operation. The phone number on every invoice is a disconnected prepaid cell, I said. The mailing address is a P.O. box that was never registered with the Postal Service in this county or any adjacent county. Warren at the bookshop told me nobody has touched that roof in 9 years. He has a bucket. He moves around the storage room when it rains. The dental office has had a slow drain in the back room for over a year because nobody came to fix it after Dale said he'd handle it. The HVAC at the hardware store is the same unit that was there when Louise bought the building. Nobody serviced it. Nobody came for any of it. Not once in 22 months. The kitchen was completely still. Even Dale had stopped moving. His face went through its sequence, the defiance, the calculation, and then underneath both of them, the floor giving way. He was looking at the manila folder on the table. He'd noticed it now. Patricia turned toward him slowly, the way something massive and reluctant turns. She turned the way a ship turns, taking time, taking everything with her. "You told me it was handled," she said. Her voice had gone flat, not the flat of anger, the flat of something that has just been confirmed. "You sat at my mother's kitchen table while she was sick, and you told me you were taking care of the maintenance. You took care of yourself." Dale opened his mouth. Patricia said, "The roof still leaks, Dale." She said it like she was reading a line she hadn't written. Final, clear, without inflection. The statement of a woman who had just watched a version of her life get quietly archived and replaced with the one that had actually been happening. From the doorway, Andrea said, "Oh my God," quietly, mostly to herself. I reached into my jacket pocket and touched the edge of Louise's birthday card, smooth and folded and warm from my body. The ones who show up are the ones who matter. I kept my voice even. Louise built those properties over 30 years. She started with one storefront and a plan and 30 years of showing up early and staying late and saving every dollar she could. She didn't leave them so that someone with access to the maintenance account could file imaginary invoices and drain the reserve. She left them because she trusted me to protect what she built. Dale's eyes went to the manila folder on the table. The last move he had left was the one he went to. "This is entrapment. You were looking for a reason to do this from the beginning." "I didn't set anything up, Dale. You submitted invoices. I verified them. That's accounting. It's what I do. I'll get a lawyer. I'll have this entire trust challenged. You're welcome to try. Your lawyer will explain to you that you're not named in the trust document. You're not a beneficiary. You have no legal standing to challenge any action I take as trustee." I placed my hand flat on the folder. "And if you'd like to explain these 26 invoices to a judge, Joyce Albright's audit report is right here." He looked at the folder. He looked at Patricia. She didn't look up. Her hands were flat on the table, palms down. He waited for her to give him something to stand on. She gave him nothing. He stood there long enough for the refrigerator to cycle off and leave the kitchen in complete silence. Then he walked out. The screen door hit the frame, his boots on the stairs, the truck starting in the parking lot below, the engine sound moving away down the road toward Cedarbrook Lane, and a house that belonged to an estate managed by the person he'd spent 2 years treating like a back office function. Patricia, Andrea, me, the kitchen table between us. Patricia sat down. She didn't ask. She pulled out the chair at the head of my table, the chair I sat in every morning with my coffee and my laptop, and she lowered herself into it like sitting was something she needed to do because the alternative was her legs making the decision for her. She put her hands flat on the binder and looked at it, at the color tabs she'd never seen before, at the folders, at the spreadsheets printed on both sides to save paper, at what 2 years of trusteeship actually looked like when it was spread out on a table, when the invisible work was made visible. "I didn't know about the invoices," she said. "Not to me, to the table." "I know, Mom. I believe you." He told me he was handling things, the buildings, the maintenance. He said it was taken care of. He was taking care of himself. She was quiet for a moment. Through the kitchen window, the harbor was catching the late afternoon light, that particular September gold that comes in sideways and makes everything look briefly more important than it is. Your grandmother knew, she said. She knew I showed up. That's all. Patricia looked at the documents on the table. Really looked, for the first time, at what being trustee had meant. The work that had been happening every month, every quarter, every tax season, every time a tenant called with a problem, every Saturday walk down Merchant Row. She saw it in the folders and the spreadsheets and the binder that had lived on my shelf for 2 years, while she called me to ask why the deposit was a day late. "I'll sign," she said. I nodded. No embrace, no tearful reconciliation, no scene. She picked up a pen from the cup next to my laptop and signed the acknowledgement form on page 3 and initialed the conditions on page 4 and put the pen down. It was the most honest thing my mother had done in at least 3 years. It happened at a kitchen table she'd never once come to before. 3 days later, Andrea called. Not a text, a call. "Can I come over?" She arrived 20 minutes after that with a paper bag from the bakery on Merchant Row and 2 coffees, both with my name on the cup the way Sunrise Cup always wrote it, and a cranberry scone she set on my counter without mentioning. She sat on my couch and looked at everything in the room except me. The window, the wall, the bookshelf, the corkboard above my desk where I'd pinned Louise's birthday card next to my certification. She fidgeted with the seam of the throw pillow. She was gathering something. "I need to explain about the message," she finally said, the reaction. I sat across from her in the second-hand armchair and didn't say anything. Dale was in the room when Mom typed it. He'd been drinking, not drunk, but enough that he was loud. He told her what to write. He was standing right behind her, and then he looked at me and said if I didn't back Mom up, he'd find a way to have my distribution cut. He said he could do that. I said, "And you believed him?" I didn't know anything about the trust, Claire. I didn't know what he could and couldn't do. I was scared. I was alone. And it was your birthday. She said the last part quietly, like she was admitting something that cost her something to say. I was sitting in a parking lot outside a restaurant where nobody came, and you pressed a button. She started crying. The quiet kind where the tears fall and the person doesn't wipe them because wiping would mean acknowledging they're there, and acknowledging them would mean having a different kind of conversation than the one she'd arrived prepared to have. "I know," she whispered. "I know what I did." I let the silence sit. "I'm not closing the door on you, Megan." I said it without planning to use her middle name, but it came out anyway. "I'm not closing it, but I'm not opening it wider than this right now. Showing up has to be something you do regularly, not just something you do when there's a problem you need handled." She nodded. She stood up. At the door, she turned back. "I didn't know you were paying my loan. I know you didn't." She walked down the stairs. I watched from the window. She sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time before she started the engine, hands on the wheel, not going anywhere yet. When she finally pulled out and drove away, she left the scone on my counter. I ate it the next morning with my Saturday coffee. It was good, genuinely good, the kind of thing you make a note of. 1 month later, distributions resumed. Coastal Property Services took over management of all 6 Merchant Row properties. Their first invoice, a legitimate and documented roof repair on Unit 2, using a licensed contractor with a real business address and a real phone number that answered, came in at $2,200, less than half of what Dale had billed for a repair that had never been made. The leak stopped. Warren texted me that same week. Roof held up through the rain. First time in years. Thank you, Claire. Patricia's monthly distribution was reduced to $4,300, with $700 redirected each month toward recovering the $48,400 Dale had taken. She'd signed the repayment schedule herself as part of the restructured terms Margaret had drafted. The alternative was a civil suit against Dale that could have taken years and consumed more in legal fees than it recovered. Patricia had chosen the deduction. 5 years of smaller checks arriving on the first of every month, a consistent and tangible reminder of the cost of looking the other way. Dale moved out of the Cedarbrook house in October. Patricia filed for legal separation 2 weeks after that, through a lawyer she found on her own, paid from her distribution. She didn't call me about it. I didn't ask. It wasn't my business anymore, in the specific way that things become not your business when you stop being the person everyone calls when something needs fixing. Andrea started paying her own student loan. She also started calling me on Sunday evenings. Short calls, 10 minutes at most. The first few were careful, the way conversations are careful when two people are finding out whether the ground is solid enough to stand on. How's work? How's mine? Did I see the thing about the new gallery opening on Merchant Row? Did she tell me Sunrise Cup added a fall drink menu? Small, ordinary things. The kind of things that build up slowly into a habit, into a relationship, into something that can hold a little weight. I drove Merchant Row on a Saturday morning, the way I always had. The new awning on Unit 2 was a deep green that suited the building better than the old one. The florist had repainted the front door a warm red. Sunrise Cup had added a window box with late-season flowers and a small bench outside, and someone had left a paperback on the bench. Hargrove looked the way it always looked, quiet, coastal, held together by the work of people who showed up every day without expecting anyone to notice. I parked, walked the strip, checked the gutter clearance on Unit 4, confirmed the property management log matched the work orders on file, said good morning to Warren, who was opening his shutters and wearing a new sweater. Then I drove home. Grandma Louise's birthday card is pinned to the corkboard above my desk, next to my forensic accounting certification. 2 documents framed differently, earned differently, both worth keeping where I can see them. The trust is running the way it was built to run. The properties are maintained. The tenants are taken care of. The distributions go out on the 1st of every month. The books balance. One text on my birthday undid years of silence. A thumbs up from my own sister cost both of us more than either of us expected. $48,000 in invoices for repairs that never happened revealed exactly who had been using what, and exactly who had been doing the work of holding everything together. And an unmailed birthday card from a woman who saw it coming long before anyone else did left me the only thing I actually needed: the language to protect what she built. Loyalty isn't a debt you pay with your own dignity. The people who only remember your name when the checks stop arriving were never counting on you. They were counting on your silence. If you've ever been the one holding everything together while the people you love look straight through you, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and come back. This family is not the only one with a locked drawer.